The first thing Minho felt was pain. Not the dull, aching pain you get after a long day at work, but a different kind. Sharp, piercing, as if someone had peeled off his old skin and stretched a new one over his bare flesh. He tried to open his eyes, but couldn't. The light was too bright. The ground beneath him was too hard. The air was too dry. Somewhere far away, he remembered a pole. He remembered the steering wheel. He remembered falling asleep. He remembered the thought of the batch of oats he never got around to planting. And then, nothing. Minho opened his eyes. Above him was the sky. Not the gray sky of Suwon, but a foreign sky. Too high. Too blue. Not a single contrail in sight. He was lying on the ground. In his hand was a hoe, a wooden one, crooked, with an iron tip worn down to half its original size. Minho slowly sat up. His head spun. The body wasn't his. He realized it immediately. His arms were thinner. His hands were smaller. His skin was sunburned red. There was dirt under his fingernails. He looked at that dirt, and the professional in him awoke first. Podzolic clay, Minho thought. pH around 5, low nitrogen. The surface had hardened in the sun. The root zone is overheated. Nothing will grow here without drainage and green manure. With those, you could bring it up to marketable yields in 2 years. And only then did the man in him awaken. Minho looked around. Before him lay a field, 4 acres by Korean standards. Not a field, a mockery of a field. Gray clay mixed with stones, 3 pitiful rows of withered carrot sprouts, crooked rows, incorrect planting depth. Someone had planted this without understanding what they were doing. Minho slowly got to his feet. His body swayed. His stomach was cramping from hunger. He realized he hadn't eaten in a long time. A very long time. Maybe 2 days. Maybe 3. He ran his hand over his face. The face was unfamiliar. Young. Thin. With a scar above the eyebrow that Choe Min-ho had never had. And then a stranger's memory flooded into his mind, as if someone had opened the door to a room that had always been locked. Minho saw it all at once. 19 years of starvation. The wooden floor in a cold hut. The smell of wet straw. His older brothers who took his food. A father who couldn't get up from the bench because his leg wouldn't bend. A mother who washed other people's laundry in icy water until her fingers bled. And his younger sister, 12 years old, skinny as a reed, with eyes too big for her face. Her name was Lyra. Minho understood her name right away. He understood everything. He understood that he was in the village of Graveholt, the northeastern wasteland of the kingdom of Varan. He understood that the local boy was also named Minho, Dale Minho. And 2 months ago, the family council had decided to send him here, to the dry hillside, the barrenest land in the village. Work it or die. Minho realized they'd left him no choice. 8 people in 2 rooms. There wasn't enough food to go around. A young man who couldn't work as fast as the older ones had to either prove his worth or quietly disappear. Minho lowered his hand holding the hoe, and then he laughed, quietly, with a dry throat, without joy, without despair. He just laughed. Because Choe Min-ho had lived 31 years in Korea, working as an agronomist for a salary that barely covered his mother's expenses and rent. He slept 4 hours a night. He read articles at night about the symbiosis between roots and fungi. He died at the wheel while returning from the field at 3 in the morning. And now he found himself here, in a foreign world, in a foreign body, on foreign, barren land, with an empty stomach and a crooked hoe. Minho sat back down on the ground, right in the dust, and said to himself out loud, I didn't really have much left in Korea either. All right, all right. He repeated that word several times. All right. That's what he always told himself during the hardest moments of his past life. When his mother took to her bed, when the startup delayed his paycheck for 3 months, when he realized he wouldn't be able to buy that plot of land he'd been dreaming of. All right. That word was his anchor. And now he said it again, and at that very moment, a window appeared before his eyes. Gray, rectangular. It hung in the air at arm's length. No frills, no welcome sound, no words like, "Congratulations, you've entered a fantasy world." Minho blinked. The window didn't disappear. He read the text. Daily reward. The first fruit harvested each day will be converted into the highest rank item in the corresponding category. Time until reset, 23 hours, 47 minutes, 12 seconds. The numbers ticked away. Minho stared at the window. Then he looked at his 3 carrots. The professional in him began to calculate. What category did root vegetables fall into? What did highest rank mean? What did converted mean? Words from a world that wasn't supposed to exist here. The man inside him smiled. For the first time in 2 lifetimes. He stood up, walked over to the nearest garden bed, crouched down, carefully raked away the soil around the outermost carrot. The root vegetable was thin, pale, like the finger of a starving child. Minho pulled it out. He brushed off the dirt and placed it in his palm. The window flickered. The carrot in his hand twitched and turned into a small glass vial. Inside, a thick golden liquid shimmered. Letters appeared on the glass, which Minho nevertheless read in Korean. Potion of strength. Maximum rank. Duration, 1 day. Minho sat on the ground, holding the vial. He sat there for a long time, an hour, maybe longer. The sun had dipped below the horizon. The shadows grew longer. Somewhere, a dog barked. Somewhere, a child screamed. Graveholt went about its usual, destitute life. And Minho stared at the vial in his palm and did the math. A maximum rank strength potion. Only knights could afford to buy something like this before a tournament. 1 vial. A peasant family's annual income. 6 gold coins. Maybe more. And every day, every single day, he would have 1 such item. If he could grow it. Minho slowly stood up. He tucked the vial into his shirt. He picked up his hoe and began to work, in silence, calmly, like an agronomist who had finally received his plot of land. Minho worked until dark. Dale's body was weak. His back began to ache after the first hour. His hands burned, his knees trembled. But Minho knew what it meant to work through the pain. He'd worked like that for 6 years in Korea, on experimental fields, in the rain, in the snow, with his sick mother at home, and with an empty bank account. The body gets used to it. The earth won't wait. When it grew dark, Minho set down his hoe. He sat down on a rock at the edge of the slope. He looked at the glass vial he'd pulled from his bosom. The liquid inside shimmered even in the dark. Minho thought, if he took this home, his family would see it. His family would start asking questions. His family would let it slip. Village head Burgum would find out. Minho didn't know the village head personally, but Dial's memory knew him very well. Fat, shrewd, a lover of other people's possessions. It was better if no one knew anything yet. Minho tucked the flask back into his shirt, deeper, under his dirty shirt. Then he stood up and slowly walked toward the village. Graveholt lay in a hollow, 23 households, crooked roofs, thin smoke rising from the chimneys, the smell of burnt straw and goat manure. Minho walked along the path, and Dial's memory guided him to each bump in the ground. A blacksmith lived here. A widow with 2 children lived here. That very Burgum lived here, in the largest house with real tile roofing. The Dial family's hut stood on the edge, 2 rooms, a thatched roof. The windows were covered with bull's bladder. Minho approached and stopped at the door. Voices could be heard inside. His older brothers were arguing about some debt. His mother was crying quietly. His father was silent, as always. Minho pushed the door open and stepped inside. Everyone fell silent. 6 pairs of eyes stared at him. Minho stood in the doorway and looked at these people. Strangers to him, but not strangers to this body. Dial's memory spoke. This is your family. They love you as best they can. They cast you out because they had no choice. Don't judge them. Minho didn't judge them. He just stood there. The eldest brother, Carvin, stood up, big, wiry, with the same sun-scorched skin. He asked with a crooked smirk what Minho had forgotten here. Minho replied calmly. He said he'd come for water and salt. He said he'd return to the hillside tomorrow. Carvin snorted. He said there was no salt in the house. He said he could get water from the barrel in the yard. He said it would be better if Minho just stayed there on his hillside. His mother looked up. She wanted to say something. Minho looked at her and nodded slightly. His mother lowered her eyes. And then Minho saw Lyra. She was sitting on the floor in the corner, 12 years old, thin, barefoot, with her hair braided into a ragged plait. She was looking at him, and in her eyes there was neither contempt nor pity, only attention. Minho remembered. Someone else's memory prompted him. Lyra had always protected her younger brother. Always. Even when she couldn't. Minho walked over to the barrel in the yard. He scooped up a mug. He drank. The water was murky, warm, with a taste of iron. He scooped up another mug and brought it into the house. He walked over to Lyra. He held it out to her. She took it, silently. She drank, silently. She handed the mug back. Minho went back to the yard. He sat down on the step and pulled a glass from his shirt front. He sat there, staring at it. Lyra came out a few minutes later. She sat down next to him, not too close, but not far away either. She looked at the bottle in his hand. Minho waited for her to ask. She didn't ask. Lyra just sat next to him and looked at the stars. Minho said quietly, "Tomorrow, I'm going to town." Lyra slowly turned her head. She asked why. Minho replied that he had something he could sell. Lyra nodded. She didn't seem surprised. Minho realized she believed him. Not because she had a reason to, but because she was simply used to trusting him. And then something inside Minho tightened. He thought of his Korean mother, of how she had been waiting for him at home, of how he hadn't made it back in time. He thought that this girl sitting next to him right now was the only living being in this world who looked at him without expecting a catch. And he told himself once, "All right." That word worked. Minho spent the night in the courtyard on a pile of straw under the awning. Dial's body was used to it. Minho's wasn't. His back ached, his side was freezing, but he slept, deeply, without dreams. He got up at 4 in the morning, out of habit as a Korean agronomist. Lyra was already awake. She was sitting on the threshold, holding a small piece of stale bread. She offered half to her brother. Minho wanted to refuse. He didn't. He took it. He ate it slowly, every crumb. It was a 2-hour walk to the city. Minho set out right away. Lyra watched him go until he disappeared around the bend. The road was dusty, gray, rutted with wagon tracks. Minho walked, looking from side to side. A foreign world was slowly revealing itself to him. The fields on either side were just as barren as the dry hillside. Here and there, farmers were working, stooped, silent. No one was singing. No one laughed. Back in Korea, Minho had known an old farmer who used to say, "Where the fields are silent, there is hunger. Minho remembered that now. The town of Rainholm wasn't much better than the village. A wooden wall, a dirty gate, 2 guards lazily let him through without looking at him. Minho entered and headed for the market. Dale's memory told him where it was. The market was small, 20 stalls, the smell of fish and sauerkraut. Minho walked all the way around it. He wasn't looking for a grain merchant, but for a merchant selling a special kind of goods. He found him in a corner, under an awning, a short man with quick eyes. On his counter lay vials and powders. Minho approached. Silently, he took out his vial. He placed it on the table. The man looked at it. He picked it up. He held it up to the light. He sniffed the cork. He looked up at Minho and stared at him for a long time. Minho stood calmly. He knew this type of person. There were people like that in Korea, too. Middlemen, greedy, but honest within their greed. If one of them gave his word, he'd keep it. The man asked quietly where it came from. Minho answered briefly. He said he'd found it in the cellar of an old house. He said his late grandfather had been an old soldier. He said he didn't have any more. The man nodded several times. He didn't believe him. But he didn't let on. He named a price, 6 gold pieces. Minho knew that was a lot. He knew it was still too little for such a potion. But 6 gold pieces was the Dial family's annual income. Minho agreed without a word. He took the money. He tucked it into his belt, and he left the market without looking back. Minho left the city a different man. With 6 gold coins in his belt, he felt a strange heaviness. Not from the weight, the coins were light. The heaviness was of a different kind. This money could change everything, or ruin everything. Minho knew that in this world, a peasant with 6 gold coins in his pocket doesn't automatically have a better life. More often than not, the opposite is true. Extra money means extra eyes, extra questions, extra knives in the dark. Minho mulled this over the whole way back. He didn't go straight to the village. He turned toward the market square by the city's northern gate. They sold tools and seeds there. Minho spent 2 hours there. He bought carefully, without greed, without extravagance. A good new hoe with a sturdy blade, a shovel, a sickle, a sack of manure for half a meddy. Not the most expensive, but not the worst either. He bought seeds, a variety of carrots the seller called northern, 2 measures of potatoes, pumpkin seeds, beans, peas, oats, a few bunches of mint and sage seedlings. For 40 copper coins, he bought salt and sugar for the family. For 5 copper coins, he got 10 pounds of good grain. For 2 copper coins, a small bag of nails and a coil of rope. He exchanged everything that remained of the 6 gold coins for silver and copper and hid it in various pockets. He sewed half of the silver into the lining of his shirt. Minho knew that thieves were everywhere. There were thieves in Korea, and there were thieves in Verona. He walked back slowly, carrying everything himself. Dahel's body ached. Minho looked at the road beneath his feet and counted in his head. Crop rotation. He would divide the 4 acres into 8 plots, half an acre each. Carrots would go first, then potatoes, then legumes to restore nitrogen, then squash, then grains, then grasses, then carrots again, repeating the cycle. In 2 years, the soil would recover. In 3 years, it would yield a marketable crop. That's for a typical farm. But he had a system. Every day, he would focus on one single, most important task, and that changes everything. He reached the village by evening, tired, dirty, hungry. The family was already having dinner. On the table stood a bowl of thin porridge, and nothing else. When Minho walked in with sacks on his shoulders, everyone fell silent. Again. Only this time, the silence was different. It was a silence of astonishment. Minho set the sacks down by the door. He walked silently to the table. He took a piece of good wheat bread out of the sack. He placed it in the center. He took out a piece of lard. He placed it next to it. He took out a small bag of sugar. He placed it next to it. He took out a jar of salt. He placed it next to it. He took out a small bag of dried peas. He placed it there. He took out a chunk of hard cheese. He placed it there. And he said matter-of-factly, "This is for everyone." Carvin stood up. His face was red. He asked where it came from. Minho replied calmly. He said he'd found an old money box on the hillside, an old copper jar buried in the ground. He said that there were coins inside. He said that the late owner of this hillside had apparently stashed them away for a rainy day and hadn't had time to come back. Carvin didn't believe him. Minho knew he wouldn't believe him. But Carvin was greedy and foolish, and Minho gave him a good reason not to ask questions. Carvin was silent for a moment. Then he sat down. He reached for the bread. He broke off a large piece, shoved it into his mouth, chewed, staring at the table. His mother began to cry, quietly, not out of grief, for another reason. Minho had never seen a grown woman cry like that, soundlessly, with her eyes closed. His father placed his dry palm on her shoulder, and he remained silent. Lyra took a small piece of bread. She spread a thin layer of lard on it. She handed it to her father. Her father took it. He chewed it. Lyra took a second piece. She spread lard on it. She handed it to her mother. Her mother ate it. Only after that did Lyra cut off a small piece for herself. Minho watched this and didn't move. He ate in silence. He chewed slowly. He gave nothing away. But inside, something was tightening and relaxing. Back in Korea, he'd never seen anything like this. He'd lived alone with his mother, and she'd always set aside the best piece for him. But here, his sister served everyone first, and only then did she serve herself. And no one was surprised by this. It was the norm. After dinner, Minho called his father out into the yard. They sat on a log by the wall. Minho spoke quietly. He said he wanted to work on the dry slope in earnest. He said he wouldn't come back home until he'd turned the soil. He said he'd come by once a week. He said he was asking his father not to let anyone else in there. Not his brothers, not the neighbors, not the village head, no one. He said that if anyone asked about the money, they should say that Minho had found an old money box and there was nothing else there. His father was silent for a long time. Then he nodded once. Then he said in a hoarse voice that he believed his son. Minho realized that these were the first words Father Bren had spoken in 18 years. Dial's memory reminded him. His father had stopped speaking to his younger son ever since the boy, at the age of 7, had let a goat fall into a ravine and it had broken its neck. That goat had fed the family. Bren had never forgiven him back then. Not with words, but with silence. 18 years of silence. And now he had said he believed him. Minho looked at the old man and nodded. He didn't shake his hand. He didn't hug him. He just nodded. That was the right thing to do. The next morning, Minho returned to the dry hillside. With a new hoe. With a new shovel. With seeds. With manure. With a clear picture in his mind. He began marking out the plots. With stakes. With rope. Precisely. Neatly. Just like on a test field in Korea. He drew the lines. He divided the land into 8 zones. He set aside the sunniest and least rocky area for carrots. The area most sheltered from the wind was set aside for grass. The wettest, low-lying area was set aside for pumpkins, and so on. By noon, the marking was finished. Minho stood in the center of his 4 acres and looked at his own plan. And then, the system opened a second window. New text appeared on the gray rectangle. Time until reset. 18 hours and 21 minutes. The first crop had not yet been harvested today. Minho looked at the 2 remaining carrots in the old garden bed. He walked over. He knelt down. He touched the soil. The soil was dry. The root vegetables felt thin and weak. He didn't pull them out right away. First, he watered them from his bucket, carefully. He mounded the soil around them with his palms. He waited an hour. Then he carefully pulled one out. This carrot was slightly thicker than yesterday's. Minho placed it in the palm of his hand. The window flashed. The carrot in his hand turned into a vial, but this time the liquid was a different color, clear as a mountain stream. The inscription on the vial read, "Potion of Clarity, Maximum Rank. Duration, 24 hours." Minho looked at the vial and thought, the category is random. A potion of strength yesterday, a potion of clarity today. He doesn't choose, but the rank is always maximum. Good, good. Minho tucked the vial into his shirt, and he went to dig the soil for his first new garden bed. For the first 2 weeks on the dry hillside, Minho worked non-stop. He got up at 4 in the morning. He walked half a verst to the stream to fetch water. He carried 2 buckets at a time. Then he broke up the soil with a hoe. Then he mixed it with manure and ash. Then he planted the seeds. Then he watered them. Then he went to fetch water again. Then he would dig again. By noon, Dael's body refused to move. Minho would sit down under a lone elderberry bush. He'd eat a piece of bread. He'd drink some water. He'd lie on the ground for 30 minutes, staring at the sky. Then he'd get up and continue. The foreign body was getting used to it slowly. His back ached constantly. His palms were rubbed raw until they blistered. The blisters burst. Blood oozed from them. Minho wrapped his palms in rags and kept working. By the end of the 2nd week, calluses had formed on his palms. At first, they were pink, then yellow, then hard as old leather. Lyra came to see him every other day. She brought bread and an onion in a small bundle, sometimes a hard-boiled egg. She didn't stay long. She would silently leave the food and leave. Once, she brought a clay flask with something cold inside. Minho opened it. It was sour kvass. Lyra had gotten it from somewhere. Minho didn't ask any questions. He just nodded. Lyra nodded in response and left. By the end of the 1st week, Minho was gathering his morning carrot from the old garden bed. He received 1 item per day, a potion of strength, a potion of clarity, a potion of regeneration, a different one each time, each one of the highest rank. He hid each one in his secret stash. Minho had set up his stash under a solitary rock at the northern edge of the slope. He dug a hole as deep as his shoulder. He lined the walls with fired clay. He placed a wooden box with a lid inside. He covered it with earth. He set the stone on top. No one would have guessed. Dael's memory told him that the stone had always lain there and that no one on the slope had ever touched it. After 2 weeks, Minho had 14 vials. Minho looked at his collection and counted. 6 gold pieces each, that's 84 gold pieces. A fortune for a village. In the 3rd week, what Minho had been thinking about for a long time finally happened. He finished the last row of carrots and walked over to the old garden bed. There were no more carrots there. They'd all been harvested. He pulled up the tops to check if any roots were hiding. There was nothing under the tops. And then the system sent him a new message. The window was the same gray color. Text: Today's first crop has not been harvested. Time until reset, 16 hours and 11 minutes. Minho understood. If he didn't harvest anything today, the reward would be forfeited. He surveyed his new plots. The carrots there were still too young. The potatoes weren't ripe. The beans had just sprouted. The pumpkins had only just begun to grow. The herbs had produced their first leaves, but they weren't ripe yet. Minho thought for a moment. He dug around a bit and figured out the rule on his own. Unripe crops don't count. If he pulled up a green carrot now, it would just be a green carrot. The system requires maturity. He sat down on a rock and thought about it for a long time. It was frustrating. This meant there would be a gap of several weeks between his old carrots and the new harvest, maybe a month, maybe 2, without a reward. Minho took it in stride. No one at home knew he had a stockpile. He decided to sell 2 more jars in town and hold out. By the beginning of the 4th month, a miracle occurred on the dry hillside. Not from the system, an ordinary miracle, from the world of agronomy. For the first time, Minho saw his carrot seedlings growing in neat, even rows. The soil, which just 2 months ago had been gray rock, was now dark, moist, with the scent of humus. Minho looked at those seedlings and smiled. He rarely smiled, but this smile lasted a long time. This was what he'd studied for 6 years in Korea. The soil he'd raised from nothing with his own hands. And it was on that very morning that village head Bergum climbed the slope. Minho saw him from afar. Bergum was climbing slowly, his 2 sons walking beside him. Carvin and another guy from the neighboring farm. Carvin, not his brother, another Carvin, Bergum's son. Dial's memory prompted him. This one's name was Hulk, and he was known in the village for enjoying breaking the fingers of those who owed him money. Minho set down his hoe. He wiped his palms on his pants. He stood and waited. Bergum approached and stopped at the edge of the plot. A big belly, a greasy caftan, a red face framed by gray stubble. First, he looked at the garden beds, for a long time. Then he shifted his gaze to Minho. He snorted, and said he'd heard that Minho had cleared the slope in a month. He said he hadn't believed it, but now he could see it for himself. Minho replied briefly. He said that the soil was the same for everyone. You just have to know how to talk to it. Bergum narrowed his eyes. He said he didn't like it when poor lads from the wasteland spouted clever words. He said he'd also heard that Minho had brought food, clothes, and good boots to the family. He said people in the village were saying Minho had found a treasure. He said that according to Graveholt's law, half the treasure belongs to the village elder. Minho listened in silence. Hulk took a step closer. Minho didn't move. He stood there and looked at Bergum calmly, without defiance, without fear. Minho replied that there was no treasure. He said he had found a copper jar with 16 gold coins that the late master had buried. He said he was ready to give 8 gold coins to the village headman as required by law. He said he would pay in silver and copper tomorrow morning. He said he had nothing else. Bergum was silent for a long time. 8 gold coins was a large sum. Minho knew that Bergum had never seen 8 gold coins at once in his life. Bergum licked his lips. He nodded. He said he'd be waiting for him at his place at noon tomorrow. He said that if Minho cheated him, he'd personally bury him on that hillside. Minho nodded. He didn't say a word. Bergum and his sons left. Minho watched their backs until they disappeared around the bend. Then he sat down on the ground. He sat there for a long time. 8 gold pieces was the price of peace of mind. Minho understood. If he'd offered less, Bergum would have thought Minho was being sly and would have kept pressing him. If he'd offered more, Bergum would have realized that Minho had plenty and would have pressed him even harder. 8 was the right number. Greedy, but not suspiciously so. The next morning, Minho brought Bergum 8 gold coins, in a dusty little bag, along with silver and copper. Bergum counted them 3 times. He tested every coin with his tooth. Then he put them away in a chest and dismissed Minho with a cold nod. Minho left, and from that day on, he only went into the village for the bare necessities. He lived on the hillside. He slept in a hut he'd built himself out of vines and straw. He worked. Every morning, the system gave him its gift. Every evening, Minho wrote in a homemade notebook made from sheets of paper he'd bought in town. The weather, the condition of the seedlings, soil moisture, which herb to use today. It was the first agronomic diary in the kingdom of Varan. The third month began with rain. Varan's northeastern rains were rare but heavy. The earth soaked up the water like an old sponge. Minho walked through his garden beds with a sack slung over his shoulders and smiled. The rain was his friend. It saved him hours of carrying buckets. It softened the soil. It washed the dust off the leaves. Minho used these 3 days of rain to repair his hut. He insulated the walls with vines and clay. He built a small stone hearth with a chimney leading outside. He stockpiled dry firewood under the awning. The shelter turned into a real little hut, cramped but dry and warm. On the fourth day, the rain stopped. In the morning, Minho went out to his plot and noticed that one carrot in the first row had ripened before the others. It was the carrot from the best tended bed, the one he'd watched over especially carefully. He'd watered it not from a bucket, but from a small clay pot with holes that he'd made himself and buried near the roots. Every day he thinned out the plants. Every day he pulled weeds by hand rather than with a hoe, so as not to damage the roots. And this first carrot from that bed didn't just look ripe. It looked perfect. Minho walked over. He knelt down. He touched the soil. The soil was loose, moist, dark. Minho carefully pulled out the root vegetable. The carrot was thick, smooth, dark orange with a sweet, clean scent. The window flickered. The carrot in his hand turned into a vial. The liquid was golden, just as before, but something was off. Minho looked closely. He read the label. Regeneration potion, maximum rank, duration 3 days. Minho froze. Before, the duration had always been 1 day. Always. The 14 vials in his stash were all 1-day ones, but this one was a 3-day one. He sat right down on the damp ground and stared at the vial. And then it clicked inside Minho. He understood. The quality of an item depends on the care given to it. This carrot had grown longer than the others. It had received more attention, more water, more weeding, and the system had taken that into account. Minho stood up. His mind was racing. This changed his entire strategy. If he harvested the first fruit he came across every morning, he'd get items of mediocre duration. But if he prepared special beds, unique ones, with premium care, and harvest from them only on special occasions, then each such vial would be 3 times more powerful, or 5, or 10. That very day, Minho revamped his entire plan. He supplemented his 8 crop rotation plots with 3 small plots: premium carrots, premium pumpkins, and premium wheat. These plots received double the amount of watering, double the weeding, pest control. Minho walked along their rows several times a day. He carefully inspected every plant. He removed damaged leaves. He sprinkled ash for potassium. He tied stakes for support. These plots became his little sanctuaries. A week after the discovery of the law of care, a second important event took place. An alchemist came to see Minho on the hillside. A young man, slender, with a short beard, wearing a clean traveling cloak, with a leather bag slung over his shoulder. Minho had never seen him before. Dial's memory didn't recognize him either. The young man approached politely. He introduced himself. He said his name was Olvin and that he was a traveling scholar. He said he'd heard in town that something special was growing on the hillside near the village of Graveholt. Minho looked at him calmly. His professional instinct told him, this guy isn't a scholar. A scholar's hands are stained with ink. This man's hands were clean. A scientist's bag would have patches from long journeys. This man's bag was new. A scientist's eyes would be fixed on the plants. This man's eyes were fixed on Minho. Minho understood. This was a spy. Not from Bergam. Bergam couldn't have hired someone like this. It was someone higher up, most likely the Baron. Minho politely invited Alvin to come in and take a look. He didn't hide anything. He showed him the garden beds. He explained crop rotation in simple terms. He said he'd picked up the techniques from an old farmer who died 3 years ago. The old man had supposedly taught him about compost and green manure. Minho knew that no one in Verona understood those terms. No one had ever given it much thought. Fertilizing the soil simply meant spreading manure on it. Crop rotation was considered a luxury reserved for large farms. But Minho spoke of it as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Alvin listened. He jotted things down in a little notebook. He nodded. He asked questions. Minho answered every question in detail and honestly. He explained where he got the seeds, how much money he spent, where the water came from, what kinds of weeds. Alvin was looking for a secret. Minho wasn't hiding one. There was no secret. There was only hard work and a system. Alvin couldn't see the system. By evening, Alvin asked permission to stay for a couple of days. He said he wanted to look around the farm a little longer. Minho shrugged. He said his place was cramped, but if Alvin didn't mind sleeping on hay in the hut, then he was welcome to stay. Alvin stayed. For a day, for 2, for a week. Minho took it in stride. He didn't rush him. He showed no sign of displeasure. He worked as usual. In the morning, he'd take his first fruit and go to the hut, as if to check something over the fire. He'd come out of the hut without the fruit. Alvin couldn't notice this. Minho had deliberately set up a hiding place inside the floor of the hut. He'd hide the vials there right away. Then, at night, when Alvin was asleep, he would transfer them to the main hiding place under a rock. On the 8th day, Alvin began to pack up. He approached Minho. He thanked him for his hospitality. He said he had learned a great deal. Minho nodded politely. Alvin paused. Then he spoke quietly. He said that Minho had no secret. He said that he possessed a tenacity unlike anyone else's. He said that this was the only magic that worked. He said he would write about it to the one who had sent him. Minho looked at him intently. The young man turned out to be more honest than he appeared. Minho handed him a small pouch. Inside were 10 silver coins and a bag of dried herbs. He said it was for the journey. He told Alvin not to forget that courtesy begets courtesy. Alvin accepted it. He bowed, and he walked down the path toward the village. Minho stood at the edge of the slope and watched him go. He thought to himself, "This alchemist will tell the Baron everything he saw. The Baron won't believe him. But after a while, he'll believe it. And then others will come. First spies, then tax collectors, then soldiers." Minho wasn't afraid. He knew he had time. A few months for sure. Maybe half a year. But for now, he had to work. Minho turned back to his premium garden beds. He knelt down and began carefully sprinkling ash around the roots of a young pumpkin. After Alvin left, Minho returned to his usual routine. Every morning at 4, every evening at 11. The days passed, one much like the next. The earth responded to him slowly, but honestly. By the end of the 4th month, the premium garden beds yielded their first results. The potato from the premium plot, which he had grown for 90 days, turned into a potion of clarity lasting 5 days. A pumpkin the size of a child's fist became a small shield the size of a tray with the inscription that it could withstand an axe blow for 10 days. Minho stowed the items in his hiding place and kept count. By the 5th month, he realized the hiding place would soon become too cramped. 26 vials, 6 shields, 4 scrolls, 3 amulets. A small fortune. He began to think about what to do next. Selling everything in Rainholm was dangerous. The same middleman already knew him by sight. Too many visits would attract attention. Minho made a decision. He would go to a distant city, to a big city, one the locals called Dalvern. Pamet Diala had told him that Dalvern was a 3-day journey to the southwest. It was a somewhat larger town, with a real market square, with a merchant's guild, with a temple and guards. He could blend in there. Minho prepared for the trip carefully. He made a false bottom in his canvas bag. He sewed secret pockets into the lining of his cloak. He bought a simple knife from the village blacksmith, not for attacking, for the journey. He chose 10 flasks of the most ordinary daily rations and 1 small shield. He didn't take the premium ones. It was too early to show them off. When he went down to the village to tell his father about the trip, he met a woman by the well whom he hadn't noticed before. She was drawing water, tall, thin, with dark braids and weathered hands. When she looked up, Minho saw fatigue and stubbornness in her eyes at once. Dale's memory stirred. She wasn't from around here. She was the daughter of the old healer from the neighboring village of Locht. Her name was Sera. She came to Graveholt once a month to trade herbs for barley. Minho walked past her. He nodded politely. She nodded back, and that was all. But something in her gaze lingered in his memory. Minho chose not to dwell on it. He was on his way to run some errands. The journey to Dolvern took 3.5 days. Minho walked at a steady pace. He didn't rush. He slept in roadside ditches under the bushes. He ate dry bread with onions. He drank from streams. Dial's body had grown stronger over those months. His back ached less. His legs carried him without complaint. Minho realized that physical labor, while it didn't make him fast, did make him resilient. He entered Dolvern in the morning through the southern gate. The city was 10 times larger than our Einholm. 2-story houses, cobblestone streets, the clanging of hammers from the smithies, the smell of fresh bread and horse sweat. Minho headed not for the main square, but for a side alley where, according to merchants he met along the way, private dealers were based. He found a shop with shuttered windows. He knocked. A fat, one-eyed old man opened the door. Minho showed him the vial. The old man let him in. The haggling took 3 hours. Minho was in no hurry. The old man offered 4 gold pieces for the vial. Minho asked for 8. They settled on 6.5. 65 gold pieces for 10 vials, another 20 for the shield. 85 gold pieces in a single transaction. Minho accepted the coins in silence. He showed neither joy nor greed. The old man nodded respectfully. He said there was more waiting for him. Minho left the shop and headed straight for the market. There he spent half the day shopping. He bought real books, 6 of them, cheap ones, simple ones, an arithmetic textbook, a primer, a book on medicinal herbs, a book about horses, a collection of proverbs, a cheap edition of the history of the kingdom of Varan. Minho was taking all these books for Lyra. He bought a warm jacket for his mother, boots for his father, simple but sturdy clothes for himself and Lyra. He bought 2 sacks of good grain, salt, sugar, 10 pounds of dried meat, tea, herbs. With the last of his money, he bought several small bags of seeds that weren't available in Rainholm. Melon seeds, seeds of a rare variety of pear, rose and lavender seeds for future flower beds. When the loaded cart set off back to Graveholt, Minho had exactly 30 gold pieces left in his belt. He hid them in a special belt under his clothes. Minho made his way back slowly. The old nag he'd hired with a coachman plodded along at a walking pace. The coachman turned a talkative peasant from the same area. His name was Halvar. He was a little over 40. His face was shrewd, his eyes shifty. Every now and then he tried to pry out of Minho where he'd gotten all that money. Minho answered briefly and calmly. He said it was an inheritance from his grandfather. He said that relatives in the city had helped him. He said he'd sold a good barley harvest last year. Halvar didn't believe a single word. Minho realized he didn't believe him. But he wasn't flustered. He watched this Halvar closely. He saw that beneath the cunning lay ordinary need. He saw that the coachman's caftan was patched in 3 places, that his boots were full of holes, that he was missing his 2 front teeth. Minho recalled from someone else's account what people in the surrounding villages said about Halvar, that he was a swindler, that he'd served a year in prison for selling bad grain as good, that he had a family, 3 children and a sick wife, and that after prison he'd fallen even further. Minho thought about this for a long time. On the 2nd day of their journey, they stopped by a stream. Halvar was watering the horse. Minho sat on the wagon and watched him from behind. And suddenly, he said, in a steady voice, that he had business with Halvar. He said he needed a permanent middleman in Dolvern. He said he was willing to pay a percentage of every sale. He said there was only one condition: never steal from him and never lie to him. Halvar turned around slowly. His face showed confusion. He asked why Minho was offering this to him. Minho answered simply. He said that Halvar knew the way, knew the city, knew the middlemen. He said that Halvar had already served time for fraud and didn't want to go back to prison. He said that Halvar had a wife and children, and they needed to eat. He said he was offering one chance, just one, no second chance. Halvar stood by the stream and looked at Minho for a long time. Then he slowly walked over to the wagon. He sat down beside it. He took off his hat, and he asked why Minho was telling him this right now. Minho replied that he'd seen a man and made up his mind. He said that's how it goes sometimes. He said Halvar was the first person he'd met in this world whom he wanted to try to lift off the ground. Halvar was silent for a long time. Then he said in a hoarse voice that he agreed. He said he was ready to work. He said that if he backed out, Minho should bury him himself wherever he ended up. Minho nodded, and they rode on. It was a day's journey to Graveholt. They spoke little, but each of them understood that something had begun between them. Not friendship, not business, but something else entirely. A pact that would yet have to be tested by time. Minho returned to the hillside late in the evening. Halvar had left for Dolvern with a promise to return in 2 weeks for the next shipment. Minho unloaded the wagon. He carried the books and clothes into the hut. He stepped out onto the dark hillside. The moon was waning. The earth smelled of grass that had cooled over the course of the day. Minho sat down on his favorite rock and pulled a piece of stale bread from his bosom. He chewed slowly. He thought about Halvar, about Bergamo, about the future spy who would come after Olven, and about the woman with the dark braid by the well. Lyra came to him in the morning. She brought a pot of hot porridge. Minho gave her the books. Lyra took the primer. She opened it. She looked at the letters. She touched them with her fingers. And she began to cry quietly, soundlessly, just like her mother had at dinner back then. Minho sat down beside her and said that in the evenings they would study together in the evenings. Lyra nodded without taking her eyes off the page. The 7th month on the dry hillside was a month of great changes. Minho built a real house, not a hut, not a shack, but a small stone house with 2 rooms. He built it at the very highest point of the hillside, overlooking all 4 acres, with a real chimney, with a small porch made of hewn planks. The construction took a month and nearly all their savings. Minho hired 3 men from a neighboring village, not from Graveholt. He didn't hire anyone from Graveholt, because no one from Graveholt had come. Half the village was already whispering behind his back. Village head Bergam climbed the hillside 3 times that month under various pretexts. Bergam's sons walked past the property line once a week and spat over the fence. Minho didn't react. He just kept working. The house was finished by the beginning of the 8th month. Minho moved into it. He took Lyra to his place for a week, to show her that she now had a place of her own. A small room with a real bed. with a bookshelf, with a little window made of real glass that Minho had bought in Dolverne from a merchant for 1.5 gold pieces. For the first time in her life, Lyra saw real glass. She touched it with her fingers. She looked through it for a long time. Then she quietly asked her brother's name. She asked if she remembered it correctly. She asked if he was the same Minho he had been before. Minho looked her in the eyes and replied calmly. He said that in some ways he was the same, and in some ways different. He said that not all people remain the same after a long illness or great sorrow. Lyra nodded. She asked no more questions. A week later, Minho took her back to the family home. On the threshold, he told his parents that Lyra would be coming over in the evenings to study with him. His mother nodded. His father walked silently over to the window. Carvin, the older brother, was at home. He overheard the conversation. He spat on the floor. He said Minho would do better to focus on more important matters. He said the men in the village were laughing. He said they were saying bad things about Minho. Minho looked at his brother calmly. He asked what exactly they were saying. Carvin hesitated. He said they were saying that Minho was acting like a girl, that he wore clean clothes, that he didn't drink, that he didn't get into fights, that he's teaching his sister to read. That's no man's business. Minho was silent for a moment. Then he said he didn't care what the men in the village thought. He said the men in the village lived just as their fathers and grandfathers had lived, and because of that, their children were dying of hunger every winter. He said he lived differently because he didn't want his sister's children to die. He said this calmly, without anger. Carvin flushed. He wanted to say something in reply. He couldn't find the words. He stormed out into the yard, slamming the door behind him. In the 8th month, another important event took place. It was a typical market day in Rainholm. Minho went there to sell his usual harvest. Not luxury items, just ordinary vegetables, carrots, cabbage, onions. Good ones, sturdy, without wormholes. He was selling from a small stall under a canvas awning. And at noon, that same woman approached his stall, Sera, with 2 woven baskets of herbs. She was looking for an open spot. Minho moved over, let her in. Silently. Sera laid out her herbs next to his vegetables. Minho looked at her wares. These weren't bunches plucked in a hurry. These were plants gathered by a skilled hand, tied properly, dried properly. Minho recognized sage, thyme, mint, yarrow, St. John's wort, and another variety he didn't recognize even from his Korean memories. He asked what it was. Sera looked at him intently. She replied that it was mountain whitewing, which grows only on the northern slopes beyond the river and helps relieve aching bones in the elderly. Minho nodded. He said he wanted to buy a bundle. He asked the price. Sera told him. Minho paid without haggling. Sera was surprised. She asked why he wanted the white-winged herb. Minho replied that his father had been suffering from aching bones for many years. Sera nodded. She explained how to brew it, how long to let it steep, how often to give it. Minho listened carefully. He took it all in. They traded nearby all day. They spoke little, but about 5 times they exchanged brief remarks about the weather, prices, and the neighboring villages. Minho learned that Sera lived with her father, a healer, that her father was old and often ill, that her mother had died 3 years ago of pneumonia, that she had no brothers or sisters. By the end of the day, they had both sold almost everything. As a farewell, Minho handed her a small bunch of dried mint from his garden. Sera accepted it. She sniffed it. She looked up at him, and for the first time, she smiled. She said his mint was cleaner than hers. She asked how he dried it. Minho explained. In the shade, in a draft, tied in bundles no thicker than 3 fingers. Sera nodded. She said she'd give it a try. They went their separate ways. Minho walked home, pushing an empty wheelbarrow in front of him. He thought. Not about objects, not about the system, but about the fact that Sera knew more about local herbs than he did, and that it would be useful to listen to her. There was a second layer to his thoughts. Minho didn't notice it right away. It wasn't until he got home that evening and was writing in his journal that he caught himself describing his encounter with Sera in more detail than his usual business entries. Minho looked at those lines. He thought about it. He crossed them out. He wrote a brief note. The girl with the herbs knows more about sage than I do. That's interesting. He closed his diary. 2 weeks later, Sera showed up in Graveholt. Minho was on the hillside. He was digging up potatoes from his usual plot. She walked up the path toward him. No baskets. She just came. Sera was wearing a gray travel skirt and a scarf. Minho set down his shovel. He wiped his hands on his pants. Sera got straight to the point. She said her father was seriously ill. She said her own herbs weren't helping. She said she'd heard that Minho's family had some rare remedies. She asked if he had anything for a coughing up blood. Minho looked at her face. Her face was dry. No tears. But in her eyes was the look of someone who hadn't slept for many nights. Minho said he'd think about it. He told her to Sera go inside and wait. He walked off to the side. He went to his hiding place. He took out a vial of 3-day lasting regeneration potion from his premium garden bed. He returned to the house. Sera was sitting on a stool at the table, looking around the room. Lyra's open books lay on the table. On the wall were Minho's simple drawings of crop rotation diagrams. Sera looked at these drawings and didn't understand them. Minho approached. He placed the vial in front of her. He said it was from an old alchemist friend. He said his friends had asked him to give it to her in case of an emergency. He said to use it like this: 1 drop in a mug of warm water. In the morning, on an empty stomach, for 3 days. No more. Sera carefully took the vial. She looked at the light. She raised her eyes to Minho. She looked at him for a long time, without looking away. Minho looked back at her. He didn't look away either. Sera didn't ask how much it cost. Minho didn't say. Sera said she'd pay him back later, that she'd pay with herbs, that she'd work it off by helping in the garden. Minho nodded. He didn't object. Sera left with the potion. Minho remained standing by the table, and he stared for a long time at the empty spot where, just a minute ago, a small glass vial filled with a golden liquid had stood. A week later, Sera's father recovered. 10 days later, Sera returned to Graveholt. She brought a large basket of fresh herbs and a bundle of dried spices as a gift. She came up the hillside, silently. She sat down under the awning. She helped Minho sort through the carrot harvest. She stayed until evening. Minho walked her to the edge of the village. As she was leaving, Sera said she would come again, without asking for permission. Minho nodded, and they went their separate ways. The 9th month brought the first cold winds from the northeast. Minho knew that winter comes early in Verona. Dial's memory confirmed it. The first snow would fall as early as the 10th month. By the 15th, the cold would be so intense that the ground would freeze to a depth of half an elbow. Minho began to work twice as fast. In the morning, he gathered the last root vegetables for the system item. In the afternoon, he finished harvesting the regular crop. In the evening, he built cellars and storage sheds. This time, he hired 5 men. 2 from Lokta, Sera's home village, 3 from a distant village across the river. He didn't call on the men from Graveholt again. And once more, half the village took offense at this, the Bergs especially. The village elder began coming by every 3 days, each time with a new pretext, sometimes to ask about the tax on dye, or to pass on some orders that he himself was making up on the spot, or just to stand by the fence and watch. Minho greeted him with the same calm demeanor. He offered him a mug of cold water. He answered questions briefly. He didn't invite him inside. Bergam was angry but couldn't find a reason to take harsh action. The 8 gold coins had been officially paid. Minho paid all his taxes on time. He didn't wrong anyone. He didn't break any laws, at least none that Bergam could prove. One evening, the situation came to a head. Bergam's sons made their way up the hillside to Minho's place. Two of them, Holk and the younger one, Sten. A couple of village toughs were with them. All four had been drinking, not heavily, but enough. They approached the gate to the plot. Minho was just finishing up harvesting the last carrots of the day. He looked up. He saw them. He calmly set down his tool. He wiped his hands. Holk climbed over the fence, silently. The other two followed him. Sten stayed by the gate. Holk walked over and stopped 3 steps away from Minho. He said hoarsely that his father had sent him to deliver a message. Minho asked what exactly. Holk said it was time for Minho to understand that he was part of the village, that one couldn't live in isolation, that good people share with their neighbors, that Minho had many sacks of potatoes and it would be the brotherly thing to do to give half to the village's common reserve. Minho looked at him impassively. He said there was no common village reserve in Gravejo. He said there was Bergamo's reserve. And he said he wouldn't give the fruits of his labor to someone else's reserve. Holk took a step closer. Minho didn't back down. He stood his ground. Dail's body had been slender, but 8 months of work had strengthened him. Minho wasn't a fighter, but he wasn't a coward either. Holk swung his fist. Minho reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a bean. A simple-looking, yellow bean. Minho had picked it from the premium garden a week earlier. It was an explosive bean. Minho had been carrying it with him all these days on purpose, just in case. He didn't throw it at Holk. He threw it at his feet, slightly to the side of himself, onto the empty ground. The bean hit a rock and exploded a second later. Not very powerfully, but with a loud bang and a cloud of dust and gravel. The ground jolted. A hole the size of a basin formed. Chunks of clay flew in all directions. Holk and the other 3 froze. Their faces turned pale in an instant. Holk recoiled. He stumbled. He sat down in the dust. Minho stood right where he was. Without batting an eye, he calmly brushed the dust off his jacket. He said in an even voice that he had plenty of those at home. He said that his late grandfather had once served in the garrison and brought these things back with him. He said he didn't like it when people came to him with drunken threats. He said that next time, he'd throw it a little closer. Holk got to his feet, silently. He turned around. He walked toward the gate with trembling legs. The others followed him. Sten, standing by the gate, didn't understand what was happening, but when he saw his comrades' faces, he turned pale too. They scrambled down the slope as fast as they could. Minho watched them go. Then he walked over to the hole. He filled it in with dirt. He sat down on a rock and sat there for a long time. He didn't smoke. He just sat there. Then he wrote in his diary, "Today, for the first time, I used an object against a person. I missed. On purpose. I was trying to scare him. It worked. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was the right thing to do. I need to think it over." By the next morning, the whole village knew. The rumor spread like wildfire. Bergam's sons had been beaten on Minho's hillside, not with a stick, but with some kind of magical weapon. A thunderstorm. The wrath of the heavens. The old women crossed themselves. The young men whispered among themselves. Bergam sat in his house and said nothing. He didn't go out anywhere. He didn't send anyone. 2 days later, the Baron came to Minho. Not in person. He sent a messenger, a young man in a clean cloak bearing the coat of arms. He brought a scroll. The scroll contained an order. The Baron demanded that Minho appear at the manor to explain the events involving the use of magic. Minho read the scroll calmly. He asked the messenger whether the Baron would come personally to speak with him, or only his steward. The messenger said the Baron himself. Minho nodded. He said he would arrive tomorrow. The messenger was surprised. It was clear he had expected excuses. He left. The next morning, Minho prepared himself carefully. He took with him a gift that wasn't the most expensive, a small vial of a one-day-use strength potion. He placed it in a simple wooden case. He put on his cleanest shirt. He harnessed the old horse he'd bought from Halvar. He set off for the Baron's estate. Haldric's estate stood 6 hours' journey west of Graveholt. A 2-story stone house behind a stone wall, stables, a garden, a large, well-maintained estate. Minho was greeted politely at the gate. He was shown into a small parlor. Baron Haldric received him personally. A 40-year-old man of medium height, a refined, intelligent face, a hint of gray at his temples. He was dressed simply but expensively. Minho bowed reservedly. He placed his wooden case in front of the Baron. He said it was a gift. The Baron opened it. He looked at the vial. He sniffed the cork and understood everything at once. He looked up at Minho. He was silent for a long time. Then he sent the servant away. They were left alone. The Baron asked Minho directly where he had obtained such items. Minho answered just as directly. He said that his late grandfather had been an alchemist he knew from the city. He said that his grandfather had left him several such vials as an inheritance. He said he was neither a mage nor an alchemist, that he simply knew how to work the fields well and take care of the little he had been given. The Baron listened. He didn't believe him. Minho could tell. But he didn't argue. They talked for an hour, about the weather, about the prospects for the harvest, about the coming winter, about how the dry hillside had risen. Minho answered candidly about agronomy. The Baron listened attentively. And at some point, he quietly remarked that Minho was an unconventional farmer, that he'd never met anyone like him before. Minho replied that there were many such farmers in this world. It was just that no one had ever asked them the right questions. The Baron smiled wryly. He said he'd think it over. He said he'd settle the incident involving Bergham's sons. He told Minho not to scare the villagers with such methods next time. Minho nodded. He bowed. He left. On his way home, he thought about one thing. Baron Haldric is no enemy. At least, not yet. Haldric is more of an observer, more of a cold-blooded merchant than a hot-headed warrior. You can talk to someone like that. You can come to an agreement with someone like that. And that means Graveholt will have a little more peace for a while. After meeting with the Baron, Minho returned home just in time for winter. Snow began to fall 12 days after his visit to the estate. At first, it was sparse. Then it grew thicker. By the end of the 10th month, the ground was covered with a gray blanket 2 palms thick. Work in the garden beds came to a halt, but work on the farm did not stop. Minho retreated to the house and the cellars. He sorted through the harvest. He stored potatoes in boxes filled with sand. He hung bunches of onions from the ceiling. He dried herbs in the attic. Every morning, the system continued to give him an item, only now, Minho wasn't gathering fresh produce. Instead, he was taking root vegetables out of the cellar that had been hidden there in advance specifically for this purpose. Storage worked according to the system just as harvesting did. Minho verified this empirically. A potato dug up from the premium garden bed and stored in the cellar retained its quality for the system. This was an important discovery. Minho began planning his winter supply differently. He set aside the 30 best potatoes separately, in a separate box, with a separate label. These would be used according to the system, 1 per day. That would cover 30 days of winter. Lyra came to see him every other day for half a day. They spent their time reading, doing arithmetic, and writing. Lyra had small, slender fingers and a quick mind. By the end of the 10th month, she was already reading the primer fluently. By the end of the 11th month, she began reading the history of the Kingdom of Varan. Minho watched his sister grow intellectually and, for the first time in a long while, felt what he used to call joy back in Korea. Sera came too, regularly now, once a week, sometimes twice. She brought herbs, she helped with housework. Once a week, she cooked a hot dinner for the two of them. Minho would pull up a stool for her by the stove. They ate in silence or spoke very little, about herbs, about people, about the weather. Sera never once asked about the vial he'd given her for their father. Minho never once asked if her father had fully recovered. They both knew the answer, and they didn't need confirmation. Halvar came from Dolvern once every 2 weeks. He brought the proceeds. He picked up a new batch of items. Each time, the batch grew. By the start of winter, Minho was already giving him 25 vials and 5 protective items at a time. Halvar sold them through his network of 4 middlemen. None of them knew where the goods came from. Halvar received his cut, 10 coins out of every 100 gold. At first, he lived modestly. After a couple of months, Minho noticed that Halvar had started to look better. A new kaftan, boots without patches. His face looked fresher. Halvar said he had bought his wife out of her debts to her former master. He said that the children now slept in real beds instead of on the floor. He said that Minho had saved his family. Minho replied that Halvar had saved himself. Minho had merely shown him the door. By the middle of the 11th month, what Minho had long been thinking about finally happened. His first apprentice came to him. Not a hired worker, an apprentice specifically. A young man from Graveholt. His name was Doim, 17 years old, skinny, quiet, with frostbitten ears. Dial's memory prompted him. The son of that very widow with 2 children. He lived in the poorest courtyard after the Dial families. Doim came into the house. He took off his hat. He didn't sit down. He stood by the door. Minho offered him a mug of tea. Doim took it. He drank it in silence. Then he spoke. He said his mother wouldn't live to see spring this year. He said his younger brother was no good. He said he had nothing but his hands and his back. He said he was willing to work for Minho in exchange for food. He'd sleep in the barn, do whatever he was told. He said he had no choice. Minho looked at him for a long time, and he remembered himself at 25 in Korea, when he was looking for his first job, standing in the office of a startup CEO with the same hat in his hand. Minho stood up. He told Doim that he'd take him on, but not as an employee, but as an apprentice. He explained that an apprentice is someone who lives with his master, eats with his master, and learns everything the master knows. He said Doim would receive food, clothing, and a modest wage of 2 silver coins a month, and, most importantly, knowledge. He said that once Doim had learned everything Minho knew, he would be able to return to his mother and reclaim her land, just as Minho had reclaimed his own. Doim listened, holding his breath. A look of confusion slowly spread across his face, giving way to realization. Then he sat down, right on the floor. He covered his face with his hands. Minho left the room. He let him be alone. An hour later, Doim gathered his few simple belongings from his family's house. He brought them up the hillside. He settled into a small outbuilding attached to the main house. Minho heated it himself. He gave Doim 2 blankets and a straw mattress. From that day on, Doim became Minho's shadow. In the morning, he helped out in the cellars. During the day, he chopped wood. In the evening, he sat with Lyra over her textbooks. Minho taught him to read. At first, Doim was shy. After a week, he stopped being so. By the end of winter, he was already reading whole sentences. Sera accepted Doim without fuss. No surprise, no questions. She now cooked for 3 or 4, sometimes 5 when Lyra stayed the night. In the 12th month, disaster struck. Not on the farm, in the village. Typhus. The disease came to Graveholt every winter, but that winter it came earlier, and it was worse. The first to fall ill was Doim's own widowed mother. Next was her youngest son. Then 2 more families. In a week, the disease had struck down 18 people. 3 of them never got back up. Doim found out about his mother a day later. Minho saw the young man turn pale and freeze by the window. Minho walked over. He said he was getting ready to leave. He told Doim to hitch up the horse. Doim asked if Minho wasn't afraid of catching the disease. Minho replied that he had something. Minho took 3 vials of regeneration potion from his hiding place, 1 that lasted 3 days and 2 that lasted 1 day each. He also took a bunch of white-winged herb. He took the very same mint he'd prepared with special care. They arrived in Graveholt by evening. Minho went first to Doim's house. Her mother was lying there with a fever, pale, thin to the point of transparency. Minho poured a single drop of the 3-day potion, mixed with boiled water, into her mouth. Half an hour later, the fever began to subside. The woman's eyes opened. Minho gave her another drop. By nightfall, the woman had regained consciousness. She asked who was there beside her. Doim began to cry and took her hand. Minho went out into the yard and continued on through the village. He went into every house where there was a sick person. To the severely ill, he gave 1 drop from the daily vials. To those with milder symptoms, he gave decoctions made from his own herbs. He didn't take a single kopeck. By nightfall, he had visited 19 houses. 7 of those households were saved from death. Of the rest, 5 recovered within the next 3 days. 2 died. Those 2 were too old and weak. Minho sat by each of them until their final hour. He said nothing. He simply stayed by their side. When the last old man closed his eyes, Minho stepped out into the courtyard. He sat down on a cold step and stared at the snow for a long time. Sera came to Graveholt on the 3rd day. She found out what had happened. She joined him in silence. She helped carry out the herbal teas. She washed the patient's laundry. She fed those who had no one left. They worked side by side without speaking. By the end of the week, the typhus had receded. People began coming to Minho, not for help, but to express their gratitude. An old woman brought a hand-knitted scarf. A young man brought a sack of sifted flour. The blacksmith repaired his horse's harness without charging him. Half the village no longer spat over the fence. Minho accepted their gratitude calmly. He didn't refuse. He didn't show off his joy. He simply nodded and said thank you. But the other half of the village, led by village elder Bergam, began to hate him even more. Winter in Graveholt was drawing to a close. Toward the end of the 13th month, snow began to settle. The first drops tinkled against the roofs. Thawed patches appeared on the southern slopes. Minho could feel the earth waking up. It was a sensation he knew from Korea. Every spring was a time when the agronomist's hands would clench with the desire to hold seedlings. Minho had already begun preparing seedlings in February in a small greenhouse made of plastic sheeting stretched over a wooden frame. There was no plastic sheeting in Verona. Minho used ox bladders sewn together into large panels, expensive but transparent. He managed to create 3 raised beds, each 10 steps long. Inside, he planted seedlings of tomatoes, peppers, squash, and cabbage. Tomatoes weren't grown in Verona. Minho had specially brought the seeds from Dolvern through his acquaintance H. Alvar. A local merchant had brought these seeds from the southern lands of the continent of Irtan. He called them golden berries. They were expensive. Minho took 10 seeds. He paid 2 gold pieces. Lyra fell ill in early spring. Not with typhus, just a cold with a severe cough. She was bedridden for 5 days. Minho gave her a single drop of the daily regeneration potion. The cough went away by evening that same day. But Minho was concerned. He realized that although Lyra's life had improved, her body had been weakened by childhood malnutrition, and that in the coming years she would need to regain her strength. Minho began giving her a little meat broth every day, fish twice a week. Halvar brought smoked bream from Dolvern. They bought milk from a neighbor in Lokta. Lyra began to fill out. By the end of spring, she was no longer as thin as a reed. A rosy glow appeared on her cheeks. Her braids grew thicker. Her eyes no longer seemed too large for her face. In the 14th month, Sera stayed the night. Without saying a word, without explaining, she helped prepare dinner, she ate dinner, she washed the dishes, she sat down by the stove, and she didn't leave. Minho looked at her. Sera looked at him. Neither of them said anything. Minho made up a bed for her in the small room next to Doim's annex. Sera went to sleep. In the morning, she got up and made breakfast. Minho sat down at the table. Doim sat down at the table. Minho handed him a mug of tea. Doim took it without a word. All three ate breakfast in silence. After breakfast, Sera went out into the yard. She hung up the clothes she'd washed the day before. She fetched water from the well. She went down to the cellar for some onions. That's how an ordinary day began. And the next day, it happened again. And the day after that. 2 weeks later, Sera left, just to bring her things back. She brought a small trunk of clothes and a woven basket of herbs. She set them down in Minho's room. And that was it. No words, no promises. It just turned out the way it did. Minho wrote a single line in his diary. Sera is here. This was followed by his usual entry about the weather. Lyra found out. She arrived the next day. Sera met her in the yard with a bucket of water. Lyra looked at Sera. Sera looked at Lyra. They nodded to each other. Lyra went into the house. She sat down at the table. Sera poured her some soup. Lyra ate it, and from that day on, she began calling Sera her older sister, without explanation or ceremony. Minho's mother and father found out a week later when Minho himself went down to the village and calmly told them. His mother crossed herself. His father nodded silently. Carvin, the older brother, stood by the door and listened. After Minho left, he spat into a corner. He said he didn't understand why girls would go on their own to that skinny old man. His mother looked sternly at her eldest son and said he'd be better off finding a wife for himself instead of sitting at home eating other people's bread. Carvin blushed. He fell silent. The following week, for the first time in his life, he went looking for work outside of Graveholt. In the 15th month, spring was in full swing. Minho planted 4 acres according to a new plan, taking into account everything he'd learned during his first year. Crop rotation had become more complex. There were now 8 premium beds. In addition to the 2 potato beds and 1 carrot bed, there was now a pumpkin bed, a wheat bed, a bean bed, and 2 herb beds. Minho calculated that by the end of the 15th month, the premium items would last 5 to 7 days. By the end of the year, their duration would reach 8 to 10 days. By the 2-year mark, it would be possible to obtain items with a 1-month duration. And then Minho would start giving them away. Not selling them, giving them away. That was what he'd been thinking about all winter. All those potions and shields in the hiding place. What did he need them for? He already had money. His family was fed. The house was built. The farm was running. Minho didn't need money just for the sake of money. And the second part of the thought came to him one evening as he sat on the porch with Sera. Sera had told him then that an elderly neighbor in Lokta had died of heart disease. Her father, the healer, hadn't been able to help. They didn't have the right potion. Minho was silent for a moment. Then he said quietly that he had potions that could help many people, that he was keeping them for nothing, that he wanted to start giving them out to those who had nothing. Sera listened. Then she said calmly that this would be the right thing to do, that this was precisely why such things exist on Earth. She said she would help him make a list of people who needed medicine. Minho nodded. This idea later became the Book of Names. Minho started it in the 16th month, a thick notebook with many pages. On each page, he wrote a name, what he had given the person, when, what he had learned about that person. A year later, there would already be 70 names in this book. 2 years later, 500. 3,247. Minho remembered every single one. In the 16th month, a second student arrived, this time from Locht. A young man named Kolv, 18 years old, Sera's cousin. He'd heard about Doim from his aunt in Graveholt. He came on his own, without anyone's request. Minho accepted him. He set the same conditions. Doim greeted Kolv the way an older brother greets a younger one, without jealousy, eager to teach. By the end of the 16th month, Minho had 2 students, and for the first time, he thought that in the future there would be 10 students, 20, 100, that this farm would become a school, that this school would change the kingdom. Minho wrote this thought down in his diary. He wrote it down and reread it. He thought about it. He added a note at the bottom. All right, it's possible, if there's enough time. He thought some more. He added another note. There should be enough time. I'm still young. He closed the diary. He went out into the yard. Sera was hanging up laundry. Doim and Kolv were hammering away at the roof of the new barn. Lyra was running along the path from the village. Minho watched all this and thought that in this world he had everything he hadn't had in Korea. Family, land, students, a girlfriend, work that has meaning, and a system that reminds him every day that none of this is a coincidence, that someone is watching over it all, that someday he'll have to meet the one who's watching over it all. But not today. Today, he had to get up, roll up his sleeves, water the seedlings, and live through yet another ordinary day. The very best, an ordinary one. Minho would remember the 17th month for the rest of his life as the month of his first real danger. Before that, there had been threats. Bergham's sons, the barren spy, the suspicious glances from the villagers. All of that was unpleasant, but not frightening. The truly frightening part began in late spring. A messenger arrived at Minho's from Dolvern. Not from Halvar, from the Alchemist Guild itself. A young man in a gray cloak with a silver buckle, carrying a sealed letter. Minho received him on the porch. The messenger read the letter aloud. The text was brief and stern. Minho, a certain peasant from Graveholt, was ordered to appear at the Dolvern branch of the guild to provide an explanation regarding the unauthorized trade in high-grade alchemical substances. He was to appear within 12 days. In the event of failure to appear, a detachment would be dispatched to escort him by force. Signed by Guildmaster Wenzel. Minho listened in silence. His face remained impassive. When the messenger finished, Minho thanked him politely. He poured him a mug of kvass and seated him on a bench by the entrance. The messenger drank it. It was clear that the young man's throat was dry from the gravity of his mission. Minho understood him. This was no real enemy. He was just a lowly servant carrying an important document. Minho said he would arrive by the specified date. He thanked the master for the notification. He had no objections to the conversation. The messenger was surprised by this response. He was used to peasants falling to their knees or starting to lie in such situations. But this one was calmly expressing his gratitude. The messenger rode off. Minho sat down on the porch. Sera came out of the house. She sat down next to him. She was silent. Then she quietly asked what that was all about. Minho told her. Sera listened. Then she said that her father had known a certain alchemist from the guild, that the guild isn't a court, that the guild is just shopkeepers in robes, that they have only one goal, money, and control. She said that if Minho could show them a benefit, they'd back off. If he showed weakness, they'd devour him. Minho nodded. Sera was right. There were guilds just like that in Korea. They were just called something else. Minho knew how to talk to people like that. That same evening, he went to see Halvar. Halvar had come to Graveholt by chance to pick up a shipment. Minho sat down with him in a small room. He placed a letter in front of him. Halvar read it. He turned pale. He said this was the end, that the guild wouldn't let him go, that usually, after something like this, a person either becomes their slave or dies in the dungeons. Minho calmly said that Halvar was exaggerating. He said that the guild was a business, and that meant you could negotiate with it. He said that Halvar was being entrusted with a task, to find out everything he could about this Master Wenzel, who he was, how old he was, what kind of family he had, what his weaknesses were, what debts he owed, what he loved, what he hated, whom he owed money to, and who owed him money. Halvar nodded. He left that very night. He returned 6 days later. He brought back a detailed report. Master Wenzel is 48 years old. He is married for the second time to a young wife. He has a 15-year-old daughter from his first marriage. The girl has been ill since childhood. She has weak lungs. She never leaves the house. Wenzel spends 1/3 of his annual salary on medicine for his daughter. He himself ranks 3rd in the guild. Above him are the archmage and the treasurer. Wenzel has had a long-standing conflict with the treasurer. The treasurer is trying to undermine him. He wants to take Wenzel's place. Rumor has it that Wenzel will face an audit from the capital this year. If the audit uncovers any violations, Wenzel will be removed from office. Minho listened attentively. He didn't interrupt. When Halvar finished, Minho sat in silence for a while. Then he jotted down a few lines in his journal. In the morning, he began to prepare. He took 4 special vials from his hiding place. A 5-day regeneration potion, a 7-day regeneration potion, a 3-day clarity potion, and 1 special vial. It was a vial that Minho had made specifically for this purpose. He'd grown a plant for it for 3 months, a perfect carrot, translucent orange, sweet. You could tell at a glance that this was a special carrot. This vial turned out to be a regeneration potion with a duration of 15 days. Minho knew there had never been anything like it in Verona, not even in the royal treasury. 4 days later, Minho set out for Dalvern. Sera was traveling with him. Minho didn't try to talk her out of it. He understood it would be harder on his own. He left Doima and Lyra at the farm. Kolv was with them. Bart, the senior worker hired just last month, stayed behind as well. The journey took 3 days. They arrived in Dalvern in the morning. The Alchemist Guild stood right in the center of the city, a tall 2-story building made of gray stone with high windows and guards at the entrance. Minho approached with the letter. The guards let him in. Sera stayed at the inn with the horse and their belongings. Minho was led through a large hall, down a narrow corridor, and into an office on the 2nd floor. Master Wenzel greeted him, seated at a desk. He did not stand up. He did not offer a seat. Minho entered. He bowed reservedly. He placed his wooden case on the corner of the desk. Silently. Wenzel looked first at the case, then at Minho, then back at the case. He lifted the lid. Inside lay 4 glass vials in felt cradles. Wenzel took out the first one. He held it up to the light. He sniffed it. He read the tiny letters. He looked up at Minho. His expression slowly changed. He took out the second one. The third. He lingered especially long on the 4th vial. He read the label. He read it again. He looked up. And Minho saw in those eyes what Sera had spoken of. A shopkeeper's greed. But not only that, something else. Weariness. Pain. The kind felt by the father of a sick child. Minho knew that look. He didn't rush to speak. Wenzel stared at the vials for a long time. Then he finally spoke. He asked where they came from. Minho recited the prepared legend. His late grandfather, an alchemist, supplies left behind in the family cellar. Wenzel smirked. He said he didn't believe it. Minho calmly confirmed that he wasn't insisting the legend was true. He said it wasn't the legend that mattered, it was the contents of the vials. And one more thing, that Minho could supply such vials to the guild on a regular basis, under contract, with exclusivity. Wenzel froze. Minho continued in a calm, even voice. He said he was personally offering the Magister the following: 1 15-day vial every month. Personally to the Magister, not to the guild, personally, free of charge, to be used at his own discretion. He said he assumed the Magister might have family members for whom such a vial. In addition, 10 vials of the standard potion each month to the guild's general fund, at half the market price. The guild would sell this batch at full price. The profit would remain with the guild. Minho asked for only one thing in return: that the guild officially recognize him as a licensed Category 3 alchemist. A simple category, no privileges, just the right to legally produce and sell mid-tier potions. Wenzel sat there without blinking. Minho knew what he was calculating in his head. The Magister was a smart man. Otherwise, he wouldn't have risen to the 3rd position. He was doing the math. 1 15-day vial, once a month. 12 of those a year. Each one is worth a fortune. Hundreds of gold pieces. That would be enough to cover the Magister's daughter's treatment for years. 10 regular vials go into the general fund. Profit for the guild. The guild is satisfied. The Archmagister is satisfied. The treasurer won't find fault. A Category 3 license. A harmless piece of paper. But it's an official cover for Minho. Wenzel thought for a long time. Then he quietly asked, why him, personally? Minho replied just as quietly. He said he'd heard that the master had a daughter, that the daughter was in poor health, that the medicine was expensive, that Minho also have a younger sister, and he knows what it's like to watch a sick child suffer. He added that he'd also heard the magistrate was expecting an audit from the capital this year, and that it was important for the magistrate to show that everything was going well in his department. Wenzel was silent for a long time. A shadow would cross his face, then calm would return. Minho waited. He didn't rush him. Finally, Wenzel said in a hoarse voice that he agreed to all the terms, that he would issue the license within 3 days, that the agreement would be formalized in writing with 2 signatures. Minho nodded. 3 days later, the papers were ready. Minho received a parchment bearing a seal, a Category 3 licensed alchemist of the city of Dolverna, in the name of Dale Minho, with the right to produce and sell, with the obligation to submit monthly reports, with protection against any accusations of illegal activity throughout the entire territory of the Kingdom of Varan. Minho rolled up the parchment. He put it in his inside pocket. He left the guild. Sera was waiting on the porch of the inn. She looked up. Minho nodded almost imperceptibly. For the first time ever, Sera smiled broadly. They left that same day. They rode back in silence. It wasn't until the 2nd day of their journey that Sera said quietly that Minho had a dangerous mind. Minho replied that he had an ordinary mind. It was just that he'd worked for 6 years at a small startup in Korea, and there he'd been taught that any large, dangerous wall would crumble if you found the single stone that held it all together. The 18th month began under the official protection of a stamped document. Minho hung the parchment with the license on the wall in the common room. A simple frame made of rough-hewn planks. No decorations, just so it could be seen. To everyone who entered the house, this document spoke louder than 1,000 words. Bergam arrived the very next day after the rumor reached Graveholt. He climbed the slope with 2 assistants. Minho met him in the courtyard. Bergam approached and stopped by the porch. His eyes were narrowed. His face was dark, as if he nodded toward the door of the house. He said he wanted to take a look. Minho flung the door open. Bergam entered. He walked into the common room. He approached the wall where the parchment hung. He read it. He reread it. His face slowly changed color, from red to gray, from gray to greenish. For 40 years, Bergam had been the most important man in Graveholt. For 40 years, his word had been law. For 40 years, he had kept every household in fear. And now, sitting in his village, was a 19-year-old boy with a guild license. A boy who could bring a detachment of guild guards from Dolvern in a single day. A young man whom, under Graveholt law, Bergam could no longer touch. Minho silently poured him a mug of kvass. Bergam didn't take it. He turned around, he walked out, he drove away. The next day, the village head's demands stopped coming to Graveholt. No requests of any kind came at all. Bergam pretended that Minho didn't exist in his village. And it was from that very day that a rift began in Graveholt. Half the village realized that the old order was crumbling. The other half didn't. Those who did began coming to Minho, not even for help, just to look, to stand by the fence, to ask a meaningless little question. In reality, they came to see if it was possible to deal with Minho. Minho treated everyone the same. A mug of kvass, a bench by the house, a calm conversation. No handouts, no arrogance. Within 2 weeks, an informal group of 7 families had formed in Graveholt, and they began to look to Minho instead of Bergam. The Doima family, the blacksmith's family, 2 widows, the family of the young plowman Tivar, the family of the old shepherd Grim, the Dylas themselves. The 8th family joined a month later when Minho helped them rebuild their barn after it had burned down. Bergam saw all of this. He didn't interfere. He bided his time. Minho understood that the village head was preparing a response, just not right away, and not openly. Minho kept track. In the book of names, he recorded everyone who came, every name, every fact a person spoke, every resource received from Minho. By the end of the 18th month, there were 120 names in the book. Most were from Graveholt and Lochta. A few were from distant villages. Rumors were already spreading. In the 19th month, a real school opened on the farm. It wasn't called that, but in fact, it was exactly that, a school. In addition to Doim and Kolva, 4 more people arrived. A boy from Locht, a boy from a distant village across the river, a 15-year-old girl, also from Lochta, and an 11-year-old boy who had come with his uncle from a village 30 versts away. Minho took them all in. He built living quarters for them in a shared annex that he had designed himself and attached to the house. 6 beds, a long table for lessons, shelves for books, a stove. Lyra began helping with reading and arithmetic lessons. She was only a few years younger than the students, but she read better than all of them. Sera taught about herbs and how to prepare decoctions. Minho taught agronomy, crop rotation, green manure, composting, and fertilizing with ash and manure, drip irrigation through clay pots, caring for seedlings, selecting seeds. Minho drew diagrams on large sheets of paper. He explained things verbally. He demonstrated with hand gestures in the field. The students took notes in their notebooks. Minho specifically insisted that everyone keep their own journal. They recorded the weather, the condition of the plants, and what they had done each day. This was the Korean principle. Without records, there is no science. Without science, there is no growth. 2 months into this school, the first external inspection took place. A farmer from a distant village 50 versts away came to see Minho. His name was Horst. He was in his 50s, gray-haired, lean, with the eyes of an intelligent, hard-working man. He said he'd heard from Halvar at the town market that Minho was teaching a special kind of farming. He said he had 7 acres of land and 5 children. He said his harvests were declining every year. He said he was ready to send his youngest son here on any terms. Minho sat Horst down on a bench. He poured a mug of kvass. He asked for details. What kind of land was it? What was the soil like? What was this year's harvest? How had the rains been? Who were the neighbors? What was the crop rotation? Horst explained. Minho listened and slowly began to understand. Horst's land wasn't as bad as a dry hillside, but it was depleted. For 40 years they'd been planting the same wheat on it. No fallow, no fertilizer, no crop rotation. The soil was dead. It could be revived in 2 or 3 seasons using simple methods without any elaborate system. Minho stood up. He told Horst that he wouldn't take his son on right away, that he would first come to his land himself, take a look, tell him what to do. If it could be revived with simple measures, then they could do without the school. Horst didn't believe him. He said Minho couldn't come to him, that Minho had his own farm, that the journey was 50 versts. That's many days. Minho replied that it would take 3 days to get there and 3 back, that he had Sera and Doim. The farm could manage without him for a week. Horst slowly stood up. He pulled off his hat. He bowed. Minho stopped him. He told him not to bow. He said that at his school and on his land, no one bows to anyone. 4 days later, Minho set off with Horst. Doim went with them to gain experience. They saw Horst's land. Minho drew up a plan, on paper, 7 acres, 5 zones, crop rotation, green manure, compost, ash, deep tilling, a 2-year plan. By the 3rd year, Minho promised the harvest would triple. Horst listened and couldn't believe his eyes. Minho left him all the papers. He gave him seeds. He gave him 3 daily doses of the regeneration potion for his wife, who was ill. He didn't take a single penny. He left. 2 months later, Horst came to Graveholt in person. He brought 5 sacks of ordinary wheat as a gift. He said he'd done everything just as Minho had instructed. He said the land already looked different. He said he'd be grateful for the rest of his life. Minho accepted the wheat. He put it in the school's communal storeroom. Horst left. A month later, another man arrived, from a village even farther away, with the same request. Then another. By the end of the 20th month, Minho had traveled to advise 18 households in 6 different villages. It was the same story everywhere. Simple rules, crop rotation, compost, green manure. Everywhere, after a season or 2, the crops began to grow. Word spread throughout the region. Halvar brought these rumors from Dolvern. He said that in taverns and at markets, people were telling stories about Minho. Some were true, most were wild. They said that Minho spoke with the earth, that the rains obeyed him, that he could revive withered trees with a touch. Minho listened to these stories calmly. He neither confirmed nor denied them. He answered every question the same way. Crop rotation, compost, green manure. If you want, I'll teach you. Half didn't believe him. A quarter laughed. A quarter listened. A year later, that quarter was living better. And that was enough. By the 21st month, Minho's farm had become the true center of the district. Halvar brought materials from Dolvern that were unavailable in the villages. Minho exchanged them for services. A blacksmith made tools for the students. A shepherd tended the flock in exchange for grain. A young carpenter built additions. The village was slowly transforming into something new. And at that very moment, what Minho had long suspected came to pass. A second man appeared on the farm, a man with a very watchful gaze. Not like Olven, not like the messenger from the guild, completely different. This man had arrived on horseback, alone, in simple traveling clothes. But the horse he rode was no peasant's horse, and his riding posture was not that of a peasant. Minho understood everything at once. This was no spy. This was one of the real observers. Minho was standing at the gate when the rider approached. The stranger stopped his horse 10 paces away. He dismounted calmly. He took his traveling cloak off the saddle. He walked over. Minho studied him closely. Middle-aged, about 35. Tall. Thin. His face was narrow with delicate features. His skin was tanned, but not like a peasant's, more like that of a man who spends a lot of time in the wind. His hands were long and strong. His belt was a simple leather one, but the leather was of high quality. His boots were well polished, carefully scuffed to make them look plain. Minho noted all this to himself. The stranger approached. He bowed politely. He introduced himself. He gave the name Ventaro. He said he was a traveling scholar. He said he'd heard in Dolverne about an unusual farm. He said he was asking permission to spend a few days here. He said he had money with him and wouldn't be a burden. Minho looked at him impassively. He said his cabin was modest, but there was room for a guest. He said he didn't accept money for hospitality. He said he had only one request, that the guest not interfere with the student's work, not ask them uncomfortable questions, not meddle in the learning process. Ventaro agreed immediately. He said he only wanted to observe. Minho invited him into the house. Sera set the table. Lyra arrived from the village in the evening and joined them for dinner as well. The students ate in their annex at a communal table. Minho deliberately did not invite Ventaro there. The guest was to sit separately. That was the proper thing to do. Dinner passed in quiet conversation. Ventaro spoke little but precisely. He asked about the land, the rains, and the crop varieties. Minho answered briefly. He noticed something. This man was no scholar. A scholar asks questions about theory. This man asked about the practicalities. Who lives here, who works here, what everyone does, how much the harvest yields, where the produce is sold, who buys it, and how much the farm brings in annually. Minho answered everything. He didn't hide anything. But he didn't reveal more than was asked. He understood that Ventaro was a royal intelligence agent, not the Baron's spy. The Baron's spy would have been one of the servants. This, however, was a man with a different kind of training, with the techniques of a capital city school. Minho knew that royal intelligence agents came once, left, and then a second one would arrive, then a third, then an envoy, then a detachment. This was standard procedure when the crown wanted to take a closer look at someone. Minho understood that Ventaro was the first, that others would follow him, that he had half a year or a year before he'd have to make a decision, and that meant he had to use that time wisely. Ventaro stayed with Minho for 9 days. Every day, Minho treated him the same way. Breakfast in the morning, then Minho would leave for work. Ventaro would walk around the farm. He'd observe. He'd take notes in his little notebook. Sometimes he'd ask the students questions. Minho had specifically insisted that all the students give the same answers whenever a guest appeared, that they were studying agriculture, that they enjoyed it, that Minho was a good teacher. Don't give any details, don't mention any numbers, talk about the license if asked, keep quiet about subjects from the system. The students had memorized the instructions by heart. Doim was especially attentive. Once, when Ventaro tried to ask a 13-year-old boy why Minho's farm was so prosperous, Doim happened to be nearby and calmly said that the boy didn't know because he had just arrived. Doim himself said that Minho simply worked very hard, from morning until night. That was all. Ventaro realized there was no direct way to get information. On the 5th day, he went out to the fields to see Minho. Minho was hilling the potatoes. Ventaro sat down on a boundary stone. He watched for a long time. Then he said quietly that it seemed to him Minho wasn't as simple as he wanted to appear. He said there were many peasants in the kingdom, and most of them couldn't run a business like that. He said that Minho could read, he could count, He could talk to the guild alchemist as an equal. He could make decisions that required an education. He said he was curious where Minho had learned all this. Minho set down his hoe. He sat on the ground across from Ventero. He was silent for a moment. Then he replied calmly. He said that when he was a child, his grandfather had a neighbor, a scholar from the city, an elderly widower with no children of his own. He said that this neighbor had taken a liking to him as a little boy. He taught him to read in secret. He gave him books. He taught him arithmetic. He taught him how to think. He said that when this neighbor died, he bequeathed his books to Minho's grandfather. That Minho later read those books as a child, at night, when no one was watching. He said he learned a great deal from those books. He said that's where his skills came from. Ventero listened without interrupting. When Minho fell silent, he nodded several times. He said it was a beautiful story. He said he almost believed it. Minho replied that it was the guest's right to believe it or not. Ventero smiled. He said that, in any case, Minho gave the impression of being someone worth speaking to honestly. Minho looked at him intently. He asked what exactly Ventero had actually come for. Ventero paused. Then he replied just as calmly. He said there was a man in the capital who took an interest in the fate of troubled peasants. He said this man wasn't yet king, but had direct access to the king. He said he'd asked him to look into and report any such remarkable cases he might find in the vicinity. He said Minho was exactly such a case. Minho nodded. He said he understood. He said he had no objection to Ventero reporting what he had seen. He said he had one request, that the report be honest, that Ventero neither embellish nor slander, that Minho was an ordinary peasant who worked hard, that he had no ambitions, that he had no intention of leaving, that he was ready to serve the kingdom by selling a good harvest, but he would never leave his village. Ventero listened. He nodded. He said he would make the report honest, that he didn't consider Minho a threat, that on the contrary, he considered him a rare example of prosperity. The next day, Ventero left. He didn't linger to say goodbye. He mounted his horse, he bowed from his horse, and rode off down the trail. Minho watched him go, and he knew he had about 9 months left before the king sent not a scout, but an envoy with an offer. Minho began to prepare, strategically. He understood that when the envoy arrived, a simple refusal wouldn't work. The crown wouldn't back down. The crown would begin to exert pressure through Haldrick's barony, through the guild, through taxes, and through the law. That meant by that time, Minho would need to have his own argument, something that would make the king say, "All right, I'll leave the boy alone." Minho thought about this for a long time and realized, the argument will be the result. If, by the time the envoy arrives, there are no starving people in Graveholt and the surrounding villages, if the harvests in 10 neighboring farms double, if well-fed peasants walk the roads instead of beggars, that will be the argument. The king won't be able to destroy what brings bread to the kingdom. The king will be forced to negotiate. Minho doubled his efforts. He expanded the school. By the end of the 22nd month, there were already 11 students there. Everyone lived on the farm. Everyone studied from morning till night. Every other day, they rode out to neighboring villages to help the locals with reseeding and composting. Minho personally visited 14 more farms. Everywhere he went, he drew up plans. Everywhere he left seeds. Everywhere he gave instructions. By the end of the 23rd month, 41 farms within a 20-verst radius of Graveholt were working under the new system. By the end of the 24th month, there were 67, and the first of them were already beginning to yield harvests 1.5 to 2 times higher than before. Minho visited these farms and could hardly believe how quickly everything was expanding. This was what he had dreamed of in Korea, what he had never been able to achieve there. Korean farmers knew all these techniques. They didn't need his advice. Here, however, the knowledge was new. Here, it spread like wildfire. It spread on its own. Minho wrote in his agronomic diary, the 24th month, the 118th day of this year. 67 households are using the new system. 18 households are waiting for my arrival. The school has 11 students. 3 graduates are planning to return to their villages and start teaching there. Doim will stay with me. Lyra will start teaching reading classes on her own. Sera is expecting a baby. Good, that's very good. Sera told Minho about her pregnancy during one of their usual evenings. They were sitting on the porch. Lyra had already gone home. Doim had gone to lock up the barn. The students were in their annex. The stove in the house crackled quietly. Sera poured herself a mug of mint tea. Minho had his usual kvass. They were silent. Then Sera said in an even voice that they would have a baby in the fall. Minho set his mug down on the step. He looked at her. Sera was looking at the hillside. Minho didn't say anything right away. He simply reached out and placed his hand on her knee. Sera covered his hand with hers. They sat like that for a long time. That evening, Minho wrote a single line in his diary. Sera said, "In the fall." Good. Very good. Sera went through her pregnancy quietly. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for any special treatment. In the morning, she got up with Minho. She made breakfast for the whole farm. She went out to the herb garden. She'd return by lunchtime. She'd prepare lunch. She'd go to the vegetable garden. Minho tried several times to stop her. He asked her to rest. Sera replied briefly that in Lokta, women give birth in their 10th month and are back working in the fields a week later. That everyone in her family had always done it that way. That she was the same. Don't ask stupid questions. Minho stopped asking. He just quietly made sure she ate enough, that she drank good water, that she didn't carry heavy loads. He took on the heaviest work himself, or assigned it to Doim. 2 months after Ventaro left for Gravehall, an important event took place. Village elder Bergum suddenly broke his long silence. Not in person, he now acted through complaints and paperwork. He submitted 5 different letters to the Baron's office containing accusations against Minho. That Minho was luring peasants away from other villages, that he was not paying the required tithe for the students who had moved there, that he was violating the ancient rules of the village community, that he was operating a production facility on his land without permission from the local administrator, that he was spreading inappropriate knowledge among teenagers. Each letter had been drafted by the village's elderly scribe. Bergum did not write them himself. Minho learned of this directly from the Baron's administrator. That man arrived in Graveholt 2 weeks later. Not as an enemy. It looked like a routine inspection. He approached Minho in the field. He greeted him. He relayed the contents of the complaints. Minho listened. Then he told the steward that he asked him to convey his thanks to the Baron for his trust, that he was ready to respond to each point in writing, that he was asking for 3 days to do so. The steward nodded. He left to wait. That evening, Minho sat down and wrote his responses, precisely, in detail, for each complaint. He attached documents to his responses, the guild's license, sales contracts for seeds, receipts from apprentices confirming payment for their training and farm work, testimonials from Horst and other estates he had helped, 12 signatures from peasants thanking Minho for the increased crop yields. The document turned out to be quite thick, 17 pages long. Minho sent it via Doim to the Baron's estate. Haldrick read it personally. Then he summoned the village elder, Bergum, to his chambers. Minho never found out exactly what Haldrick had said to him in that private conversation. But Bergum returned to Graveholt a changed man. He had deflated. He'd lost weight. He began walking through the village with a hunched back. He stopped organizing the harvest gatherings. He stopped yelling at the men. He never brought up his own complaints again. Minho noticed this. He didn't gloat. He did one thing. The following Sunday, he brought the Burgum family 3 loaves of bread from his own harvest and 1 large piece of smoked bacon. Burgum's son Holk accepted the gift in silence. He didn't say thank you. He didn't refuse it. He simply accepted it. Minho left. From that day on, Burgum's sons stopped spitting over the fence. It was the middle of the 25th month. Sera's 6th child was born. Minho had already recorded the 186th name in the Book of Names. There were now 12 apprentices on the farm. In the 26th month, what Minho had warned Halvar about came to pass. A second Royal Scout arrived. This one was completely different, young, energetic, and articulate. He introduced himself as Alvern, a merchant from the capital. He said he was looking for farms to supply the capital's market. Minho received him just as he had received Ventaro. He offered him lodging. He fed him. He let him look around freely. Alvern stayed for 4 days. He asked cunning questions. He tried to get the students to talk. He tried to get Doim drunk on the beer he'd brought with him. Doim politely accepted the beer. He went to bed early. In the morning, he was refreshed. Alvern learned nothing new. He left, slightly irritated. Minho realized that after this visit, the king's envoy would arrive soon, in about 4 or 5 months. By the 28th month, in the fall, when Sera was due to give birth, Minho sped up his preparations. He took care of the most important things. He made arrangements with Halvar for a special shipment to the capital. 30 one-day vials of strength potion, 20 one-day vials of clarity potion, 10 3-day vials of regeneration potion, and 1 special item, 1 zucchini breastplate from a premium garden bed, with 30-day protection against arrows and spears. Halvar, person to Dalvern. There, using the system they had built over 2 years, Wenzel arranged for delivery to the capital, to the royal arsenal, on behalf of the Dalvern Guild as an annual gift to the crown. 2 months later, a parchment of thanks arrived from the capital, personally signed by the kingdom's treasurer. Wenzel sent a copy to Minho via a separate messenger. Minho hung the parchment itself next to the license. The second piece of paper on the wall. Minho knew that these documents would postpone the king's intense pressure. They wouldn't cancel it, but they would postpone it. The king would see that Minho could be truly useful, that he had a controllable supply channel, that he was more profitable than a living person. By the beginning of the 28th month, Sera had given birth, a daughter. They named her Hana. Minho delivered the baby himself, with the help of an old midwife from Lokta who had been brought in ahead of time. Sera had a difficult labor but didn't scream. She just clutched the sheet so tightly that the fabric tore. Minho held her hand. The midwife did her job. When the baby's cry rang out, Minho looked at that tiny, red, wet creature in the midwife's arms and felt something he had never felt in his past life. Nor had he felt it in this one. At least, not yet. He took his daughter into his arms, held her, passed her to Sera. Sera pressed her to her breast. She closed her eyes, and for the first time ever, Minho saw tears rolling down Sera's face. They were both silent. That night, Minho wrote a single line in his diary. The 28th month. Hana was born. Good. That's all. What more could I ask for? 5 days later, a messenger arrived from the royal capital. The messenger arrived in the morning, alone, without an escort, on a sturdy black horse, wearing a black and gold cloak bearing the Varan coat of arms. Minho went out to meet him on the porch. Sera was inside feeding Hana. Lyra had gone to the village for milk. Doim stood next to Minho. The students were working farther down the hillside. The messenger dismounted. He approached. He bowed respectfully. He asked for Dial Minho. Minho confirmed it was him. The messenger took a scroll out of a leather tube. He unrolled it. He read it aloud. The message was from the royal governor of the lands. King Edmar IV informed Dial Minho of his desire to see him in the capital for an audience at the royal palace. The meeting was scheduled for 40 days hence. An escort would be provided. A reply was required within 10 days. Minho listened. He didn't flinch. He accepted the scroll. He read it over himself. The document was worded politely, not like an order, but like an invitation. But Minho knew that in royal affairs, the difference between an invitation and an order was purely cosmetic. It was possible to refuse. Possible. But then things would go badly. Minho offered the messenger a mug of kvass. The messenger accepted it. He sat down on a step of the porch. Minho sat down beside him. He told the messenger that he was ready to give his answer right away. The messenger was surprised. He said that the rules allowed 10 days to consider the matter. Minho replied that he already knew what he would say. He said he asked the messenger to convey his deepest gratitude to His Majesty for the invitation. He said he could not travel to the capital right away, that his wife had given birth to their first daughter 5 days ago, that his wife was weak after childbirth, that Minho could not leave her, nor did he want to. He also said that if His Majesty so urgently needed to meet with him, Minho asked for permission to propose an alternative, that a royal envoy, authorized to represent His Majesty in negotiations, come to Graveholt. Minho would receive such an envoy with honors. He would provide for his needs, accommodate him for as long as necessary, and answer all his questions. He said he was ready to convey any guarantees to the crown through the envoy, including his personal oath of allegiance. He said he was ready to triple the annual deliveries to the royal arsenal starting next season without raising the price. He said he was ready to open a school in Graveholt for peasant children from any villages the king might send them from. He said one more thing. If His Majesty desires a personal meeting, Minho will come in person in a year, when his daughter is older, when his wife has regained her strength, when the school is up and running. In a year, Minho promises to come himself and kneel before the king. Not before. Absolutely not. The messenger listened to all this, and his expression slowly changed. Minho saw that the young man was used to the fact that peasants in such situations would fall to their knees and promise anything just to be forgiven for their audacity. But this one was sitting calmly on the porch, haggling. Minho concluded the conversation. He poured the messenger some more kvass. He asked him to write down everything word for word and convey it to His Majesty. He said he would add one more token of respect, a gift to accompany this conversation. He stood up, went into the house, returned 2 minutes later. He brought a wooden case. He placed it in front of the messenger. The messenger opened it. Inside lay 3 items. The first, a glass vial containing a clear golden liquid, a potion of clarity lasting 20 days. The second, a small scroll rolled from a mint leaf, a scroll of combat acceleration for an infantryman. The third, a silver amulet shaped like an apple, a ring of mental protection lasting 1 year. All 3 items were of the highest rank. All 3 were incredibly expensive. The messenger looked at the contents of the case, and it was clear that his breath caught in his throat. Minho said calmly that he asked the messenger to deliver this gift to His Majesty as a sign of sincere loyalty, and as proof that Minho was not all talk, that if His Majesty accepted Minho's offer, Minho had a way to prove his worth to the crown. The messenger stared into the case for a long time. He closed the lid, took it in his hands, pressed it to his chest as if it were a treasure. Minho understood that for the messenger, delivering this case to the capital intact had become a matter of life and death. The young man would guard it as if it were his own child. That was necessary. That was right. That way, the message would surely reach its intended recipient. The messenger stood up. He bowed lower than he had upon his arrival. He rode off that very hour. He spurred his horse on quickly. Minho stood on the porch and watched him go. Doim, standing nearby, quietly asked what would happen now. Minho replied that there were now 4 possibilities. First, the king will accept the reply graciously. He'll send an envoy, then Minho will have a chance to negotiate.